The alarm on the console chirped 3 times in a row, just off-tempo enough to be wrong. It wasn't the blaring kind of alarm that makes everyone jump. It was subtle. 3 clipped beeps that threaded under the Admiral's briefing like a bad harmony. Nobody else seemed to notice. The projector hummed. The air conditioner pushed cold air down from the ceiling vents, ruffling the edges of printed slides on the long table. I noticed. My cursor hovered over the comms dashboard at the back of the room. My chair was pressed up against the bulkhead, half in the shadows, tucked behind a row of officers who probably didn't know my name. The screen's glow painted my hands pale blue. My father's old coin sat cold in my left palm, the worn edge digging into my skin like a reminder. Pay attention. On the big screen, Admiral Jonathan Ross pointed to a map of the Atlantic. "Strike Group Truman will be here by Wednesday," he said. "We can't afford a blackout, not even for 30 seconds. My console beeped again, 3 quick pulses. I clicked into the diagnostics log. Something crawled through the data like a shadow. A block of code flashed at the bottom of my screen. There, then gone. Not Navy standard, not any language we used. Like a fingerprint pressed into wet cement and smeared before it dried. My heart thudded once, hard and clean. The air suddenly felt colder on my neck. I dug into the system, fingers flying across the keys. Backtrace. Cache. Hidden processes. The code kept slipping just out of easy view, embedded in emergency protocols. Every time I thought I'd pinned it down, a line recompiled, and the trail tried to erase itself. Whoever wrote this didn't want it found. Whoever wrote this knew exactly where to hide it. On the big screen, the Admiral's laser pointer slid across icons representing ships, destroyers, cruisers, the carrier itself. "If we lose communications," he said, "we lose coordination. If we lose coordination..." I watched another line execute in my console. Something tagged D9. A flag on an internal command path that should have been locked behind security-only officers touched. My palms went slick. I squeezed the coin harder. The metal warmed slowly against my skin. If this code triggered, it could shut down comms for the entire strike group. No one was looking at me. That part was familiar. I was Emma Warren, junior Navy tech, the girl who could have worn her cover backwards and walked through the hangar deck without anyone blinking twice. I was extra hands in the server room, an extra body on the watch bill, a name on the roster you'd skim past. But I was also the one staring at a live threat, while a 4-star talked about the importance of staying online. I felt the moment stretch. The safe path? Log it. Flag it to my senior chief later. Get told I was overthinking. The dangerous path? Break the room's gravity. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the deck with a sharp, dragging scrape that cut under the Admiral's sentence. A few heads turned, not many. My division chief, Lieutenant Carver, shot me a look that said, "Sit down." I stood up. "Sir," I heard my own voice say, steadier than I felt. "You need to see this." The room froze. The Admiral's laser pointer stopped mid-sweep. Officers turned slowly, like one organism, in my direction. The projector's fan seemed louder now. I could hear someone's pen rolling across the tabletop in the quiet. Senior Chief Harlan twisted in his chair to glare at me, jaw clenched, knuckles white around his notebook. His stare promised consequences. My future hung on a single heartbeat. But I didn't sit back down. I stepped forward, coin in one hand, the other resting on the console edge, and watched the entire chain of command swivel to face the person none of them had planned on noticing today. I hadn't joined the Navy to be brave. I joined because the bills didn't care about my degree being unfinished, because my mother kept the TV volume low when deployment news came on, and because my father left behind more stories than savings when he died. "Machinist mate, Vietnam," she'd say, looking at his photograph on the mantel. Your father did his job and didn't make a fuss. Doing my job without making a fuss had sounded like something I could handle. My first year in uniform, I blended into gray bulkheads and blue coveralls. I was the one double-checking IP tables at 0200, the one wiping dust off server fans while the rest of the watch scrolled their phones, the one signing for deliveries no one else wanted to walk to the pier for. Senior Chief Harlan liked sailors who spoke loud, laughed louder, and didn't ask questions. I wasn't that type. He called me Background Emma once, in the passageway, not knowing I could hear him. I pretended it didn't sting. Instead, I learned to listen more closely, to see the way cables ran under floor plates, to recognize the faint change in a server rack's hum when something overheated, to trust the prickling feeling at the back of my neck when numbers didn't add up. My father's coin moved from pocket to pocket with every set of coveralls I wore. The surface was worn smooth on one side, scarred on the other. He'd carried it through river patrols and boiler rooms, according to Mom. I started carrying it through midnight maintenance and shipyard overhauls. "Don't turn this into some heroic thing," Mom had begged when I signed my contract. "Just stay safe. Keep your head down." I promised I would, but keeping my head down had turned into keeping my mouth shut. That worked until I met the code. The first time I saw it was on the Truman, 3 weeks before the Admiral's briefing. I'd been assigned to the carrier's comms node for what was supposed to be a routine qualification rotation. The space smelled like plastic and stale coffee, the kind of place where fluorescent light flattened everyone's faces into the same tired shade. I was running through emergency protocol simulations, watching green lights blink across panels, when a tiny spike flickered in the traffic monitor. Not a full alarm, more like a cough in the data. I zoomed in. There it was. A fragment, just a few lines long, tucked inside a subroutine that handled emergency broadcast overrides. It shouldn't have been there. It didn't match any template I'd seen in training. By the time I drilled down, it was gone. I'd flagged it in the log, annotated it, printed the anomaly report on thin thermal paper that still smelled faintly of burnt paper when it slid into my hand. I'd taken that printout to Harlan. He'd barely looked at it. "Sir, it's embedded in the emergency," I'd started. "Log it green, Warren," he'd cut in, his voice the verbal equivalent of a closed door. "System burped. Move on. Don't overthink it." I'd stood there, report in hand, feeling the deck sway under my boots with the slow roll of the ship. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. Someone laughed at a joke across the compartment. "Senior, if it's foreign—" His eyes had snapped up then, hard and flat. Did I stutter? My fingers had tightened on the thin slip of paper. The heat in my cheeks had climbed. The urge to push back had been loud, but my rank on my chest had felt small. I'd logged it green. I'd moved on. But the code hadn't. It kept popping up. Not always in the same place. Sometimes nested in backup routines, sometimes in failover test paths, like it was probing the perimeter. Every time I dug, it shifted. Every time I mentioned it, the response from above was sharper. Once, I found my workstation wiped clean after I'd saved screenshots to a secure directory. Another time, I discovered my login locked by mistake for an entire watch. Then there was the note. It had been on my keyboard after chow. A torn piece of printer paper with words scratched in thick black ink. Keep quiet or get transferred to nowhere. No signature, just the faint smudge of a greasy thumbprint. I'd folded the note and tucked it behind my coin in my pocket, the paper rough against the smooth metal. My hands shook for exactly 4 seconds. Then I steadied them. I went back to work. But I stopped asking Harlan for help. That was the last line for me. If chain of command didn't want to see it, I'd have to find someone who did. Which brought me to the back of Admiral Ross's briefing room, hands on a console, staring at code that had just winked at me and vanished again. This time, I wasn't logging it green. As all eyes pinned to me, I watched Admiral Ross's face shift, Not angry, not yet, but carved into a sharper kind of attention. Senior Chief Harlan's voice cut through the silence. "Warren, sit down. We'll handle this after." The Admiral lifted a hand without taking his eyes off me. Harlan's words died in his throat. "What are you looking at, petty officer?" Ross asked. The rank sounded heavier when he said it, like it meant more than a line on a uniform. I swallowed once. The air felt thin. "Sir," I said, "I've been tracking a non-standard code fragment in emergency comms. It just surfaced again in this network. It's self-erasing. If it triggers, we could lose the entire strike group's communications." I felt the resistance before I heard it, the collective tightening, the reflexive doubt aimed at the lowest-ranking voice in the room. My division chief shifted in his seat. "Admiral, we can review logs later." Ross cut him off with a small tilt of his head. "Show me," he said. My heart slammed once against my ribs. This was the line. If I was wrong, I'd be transferred, blacklisted, maybe worse. If I was right. I turned back to the console, fingers already flying, the imprint of my father's coin pressing into my palm. Behind me, the room full of brass leaned forward as one. They finally saw me. Now I had to make them see the threat. My fingers moved before my brain had a chance to second-guess. I pulled up cached logs, fingers tapping out commands I'd run so many times they felt like muscle memory. The console's plastic edge pressed into my wrists, and the fan inside the tower kicked up a notch, a low whirr that cut through the silence. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The cursor blinked at me like it was laughing. My neck prickled. I could feel Senior Chief Harlan's stare drilling into the back of my skull. "Petty Officer Warren," he said, voice low. "You're wasting the Admiral's time." I kept working. "One moment, Senior." The room tensed at my reply. It wasn't what I said, it was that I didn't sit down. I dug into shadow logs, places where transient processes leave footprints if you know where to look. My father used to describe it like steam trails in the engine room. "Nothing passes without leaving heat behind," he'd say, flipping his coin between grease-stained fingers. "Question is, do you care enough to look?" There. A hidden process ID, a coded alias, a label. Emergency failsafe /D9. My heartbeat synced with the blinking cursor. I rerouted the view to the projector before anyone could stop me. The briefing map vanished. The big screen flickered, then filled with lines of code, white text on deep blue. Whispers broke out around the table. Someone swore under their breath. Words stared back at us. If author size equals Truman strike round, and status equals emerge broadcast, then comno equals null, exec self-erase, number #sig D9. You didn't have to be a comms tech to understand this one. If this branch fired during an emergency broadcast, it would null out the entire strike group's comm node. No backup, no redundancy, and then it would erase itself. Admiral Ross stepped closer to the screen, the ribbons on his chest catching the projector's glow. The room held its breath. Harlan surged up from his chair, face dark red. "That's a corrupted test script. She doesn't know what she's showing." Ross didn't look at him. "When did you first see this, petty officer?" the Admiral asked. 3 weeks ago aboard Truman, sir," I answered. My voice surprised me. It sounded calm. "It's been migrating through emergency comms environments since then." "Documented?" "Yes, sir. Initial anomaly logged and annotated. Subsequent attempts to record it were deleted." The Admiral's gaze sharpened at that. "Deleted by what?" "By whoever holds access to that D9 signature, sir." That landed like a punch. Behind me, I heard the small thud of someone's pen hitting the tabletop. Lieutenant Carver shifted, uncomfortable. A captain near the far end of the table cleared his throat, then thought better of speaking. Harlan tried again. With respect, Admiral, Warren's speculating. We've been running upgrades non-stop. Bugs happen. We'll scrub it quietly without disrupting. Ross held up one hand, and the senior chief's words cut off mid-syllable. Quietly, the Admiral repeated, still watching the screen. That's exactly what someone counting on this would want. He looked at me. Really looked this time. Eyes searching, weighing. You understand what you're implying, Petty Officer? He asked. Yes. I was implying there was sabotage, embedded in our systems, tied to a label that smelled like high-level access and compartmented clearance, tied to someone who thought a nobody tech would notice and be too scared or too obedient to say anything. My fingers pressed the coin deeper into my palm until the ridged edge bit my skin. Yes, sir, I said. I do. For a moment I thought I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Pain, maybe, or memory. It passed quickly. He turned to the room. Lock this network segment, he ordered. Full isolation. No external access until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Lieutenant Carver started to object. Sir, that will stall comms testing for... Ross didn't raise his voice, but it cut like a blade. Do it. Carver snapped his mouth shut. The Admiral faced me again. Warren, you said you've documented this before. Who have you reported it to? I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to soften what I was about to say, to protect myself, to avoid making a direct enemy out of the man who controlled my evaluations, my schedule, my life afloat. But then I remembered the threat note on my keyboard, the oily fingerprint, the wiped workstation. Log it green, move on. My father's voice rose from some quiet place in my memory. If you're going to stand, stand all the way up. I brought it to Senior Chief Harlan, sir, I said. Multiple times. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. All eyes swung to Harlan. He barked out a short laugh. She brought me one glitched printout. I told her it was system noise and to keep working. You going to derail an entire fleet plan over an E4's ghost in the machine? There it was. E4. My pay grade, wrapped like an insult. Admiral Ross's jaw tightened. What did you say your father did, Warren? I blinked. Machinist's mate in Vietnam, sir. He gave a small nod, like that connected dots I couldn't see. He ever tell you what happens when people ignore small warnings down in the engine room? Yes, sir, I said quietly. He said you don't lose a ship all at once. You lose it bolt by bolt, while people explain away the knocking. A faint sound rippled through the room. Not quite approval, not quite discomfort, something in between. The Admiral turned to the comms officer by the wall. Commander Briggs, you're cyber investigator for this group. Effective immediately. You will treat this as a potential sabotage incident. Commander Briggs straightened. His uniform still carried a faint chemical smell, like he'd just come off a flight line. Aye, sir. Warren is under your protection and operational control until further notice, Ross added. Harlan exploded. Sir, with respect, that's insane. She's a junior tech with a history of overthinking. You put her under investigation status, and you'll encourage every other kid with a dashboard to cry wolf whenever they want attention. The phrase hit me like a slap. Kid, attention. It wasn't even creative. Ross swung to him, and this time there was no masking the steel in his eyes. I lost a daughter to a glitch once, Senior Chief, he said softly. The softness made it worse. She was a junior tech, too. Someone told her not to overthink it. The room stopped breathing. My chest tightened. I'd heard rumors about the Admiral losing family. Nobody ever said details. Now I understood why this code on the screen looked like more than just lines to him. He continued, voice measured. If Warren is wrong, we'll know. If she's right and we ignore her, we'll read about it in an investigation report written over coffins. No one answered that. He looked back at me. Pack up whatever you need from this console. You're moving to a secure workspace until we finish the initial review. The words hit like a strange kind of shock. Not punishment, not praise either. Containment, protection. Yes, sir, I said. My hands suddenly felt too big and too clumsy for the keyboard, but they moved anyway. I dumped active logs to an external secure drive, watching progress bars crawl across the screen. The room remained hushed, that charged kind of quiet you get after a near miss on deck. As I worked, someone brushed past my chair. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The heat coming off Harlan's body was its own warning. He leaned down, so close his breath hit the side of my neck, smelling like coffee and something burnt. His voice dropped to a growl only I could hear. You just made the worst mistake of your career, Warren. I didn't turn my head. That note on my keyboard wasn't subtle either, Senior, I murmured. You might want to be more careful what you leave lying around. He jerked back a fraction, just enough for me to know the hit landed. He hadn't expected me to keep the note. He definitely hadn't expected me to mention it in the same room as an admiral and a cyber investigator. Everything okay back there? Commander Briggs called, watching us. I closed the final log and pulled the drive free. The plastic was warm against my fingers. Yes, sir, I said, stepping away from the console. Admiral Ross nodded once. This briefing is now classified compartmental. No one discusses what we saw today outside cleared channels. Warren, Briggs, secure room 3. Now. Movement resumed in slow motion. Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled. Voices remained low, wary. I slipped my father's coin into my pocket next to the folded threat note. The two pressed together, old metal and cheap paper, legacy and warning. As I followed Commander Briggs out of the briefing room, I felt Harlan's gaze burning into my back. He wasn't just angry. He was afraid. That was new. The door slid shut behind us with a firm hiss, sealing away the officers, the code on the screen, and the version of me that had belonged in the background. Ahead, down the passageway toward the secure comms office, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. For the first time since I'd joined the Navy, I wasn't walking just to keep up with someone else's orders. I was walking into a fight I had chosen. Secure Room 3 sat buried deep in the comms building, behind 2 cipher locks and a steel door that closed with a heavy, echoing clunk. The air inside was cooler than the hallway, filtered, humming with the quiet presence of machines that never slept. Commander Briggs swiped his badge, tapped a code, and the inner screen flickered to life. No windows, just gray walls, a table bolted to the deck, and 3 terminals arranged in a triangle. The faint smell of ozone and disinfectant hung in the air. "Take a seat, Warren," he said. The chair scraped softly as I pulled it out. My boots felt heavy on the metal floor. I set my notebook down, then slipped my father's coin from my pocket and pressed it under my thumb, hidden from view. Briggs closed the door behind us. The lock engaged with a decisive click that sounded more final than I wanted to admit. He sat across from me, hands folded, expression neutral. Not friendly, not hostile, just measuring. "Okay," he said. "Let's start with what you've seen. Everything. No abbreviations, no, I assumed it was nothing." I nodded. Yes, sir. I walked him through it. The first flicker of code on Truman. The way it nested in the emergency routines, not in the everyday chatter. The wiped workstation, the locked login, the threat note. Every time I spoke Harlan's name, Briggs's eyes sharpened a fraction. At one point, he stopped me. This note, you still have it? I pulled my small notebook from my pocket. It was standard issue, corners soft from being stuffed into my coveralls. Inside the back cover, tucked flat, was the folded scrap of printer paper. I slid it across the table. He lifted it by the edge, careful not to smudge it. The ink strokes were thick and angry. Keep quiet or get transferred to nowhere. He didn't comment, just laid it beside his laptop like an exhibit. The D9 tag? He asked. You're sure it was consistently attached? Yes, sir. I saw it embedded as a signature in every variant. Sometimes hashed, but the pattern lined up. He nodded once, then started typing. His fingers moved with the focus of someone used to juggling security flags and chain of custody forms. As he worked, I looked at the terminals. Their screens were dark, but their power lights glowed steady. One of them reflected my face faintly, a ghost image of a young sailor with tired eyes and a rank that didn't match the weight of what she'd just done. Why didn't you come to me earlier? Briggs asked without looking up. Respecting chain of command, sir, I said. I reported up. I got told to log it green and move on. He glanced at the note. And this? That told me chain of command was compromised, I said quietly. So I had to find someone who wasn't. He studied me for a second longer than was comfortable. You know this could wreck your evals, even with my recommendation. People don't like it when the lowest rank in the room forces a change in the plan. I rolled the coin between my fingers, feeling the worn ridges. Respectfully, sir, losing a strike group would wreck more than my evals. He snorted once. It might have been a hint of approval. A soft chime sounded from his laptop. He turned it toward me. On the screen was a time-stamped log from Truman's network. The exact code I'd just shown in the briefing, embedded in a practice run from 2 weeks ago. Pulled this from a backup image, Briggs said, hidden in the noise. You were right. It erases its visible trail, but it's sloppy underneath. Sloppy enough to trace? I asked. His jaw tightened. Sloppy enough to know it's deliberate. Not enough yet to hang a name on. He tapped a key and more data flooded the screen. IP chains, access lists, auth logs. There. D9 again. Not as a username, as an access class. D9, he murmured. That's not a standard designation. Someone built themselves a private door. He leaned back, eyes distant for a moment, connecting dots I couldn't see. What's our next step, sir? I asked. We see who tries to close the door we just opened, he said. He turned to the nearest terminal and powered it on. The fan spun up with a low whine, the screen blooming into a secure login prompt. I'm mirroring the network segment you exposed in there, he said. Air-gapped, one-way feed. We'll watch who pokes at it now that they know you shouted. He didn't say if they know. He said, now that. Because people like D9 always watch their own tripwires. He logged in with credentials that scrolled across the bottom of the screen, obscured but clearly higher than anything I'd ever touch. Lines of code began streaming in, data from the quarantine segment. For a minute, nothing unusual happened. Just normal background chatter, heartbeat pings, routine checks. Then a new thread appeared. A process spawned. Remote. Unauthorized. D9CKN. My breath caught. Someone's checking if their toy still works, Briggs said softly. He typed faster, fingers striking the keys with precise force. He dummied a response from the segment, a false status, something that would tell the code its pathway was blocked but not destroyed. Another process flickered. D9_reauth. The screen stuttered. The process escalated its privilege request. And then, abruptly, the terminal went black. The fan cut off mid-whir. The small power light blinked twice, then died. The sudden silence was loud. I sat back slowly. That wasn't us. Briggs stared at the dark screen, jaw clenched. No, that was someone yanking the cord from somewhere they shouldn't be able to reach. I felt a chill seep under my collar. The room suddenly felt smaller. The filtered air had a sharp, metallic scent. He stood up, moved to the wall, and flicked the light switch off and on. The overhead fluorescence obeyed. Power was fine, just that terminal was dead. He crouched, checked the cords. Cut from inside the network handshake, he muttered. That level of reach means officer clearance at least. He straightened, eyes harder now. Congratulations, Warren, he said. You've officially scared whoever owns D9. I swallowed. The coin felt heavier than ever. Is that good or bad, sir? I asked. Both, he said. Good because we rattled them. Bad because rattled animals bite. He sat back down, opened a manual logbook, real paper, not digital, and wrote quickly, recording every detail of the last 5 minutes. Time, actions, failures, that strange D9 handshake. As he wrote, a thought slid cold and sharp into my mind. If D9 could kill power to an isolated terminal inside a secure room, they could tamper with more than code. They could tamper with evidence, with logs, with people. Sir, I said quietly, if they know I expose them, they know where I work, where I rack out, who I answer to. Not anymore they don't, he replied. As of about 10 minutes ago, you answer to me and the Admiral. The words should have been reassuring. They weren't. Not fully. Because one of the people I used to answer to had access to my schedule, my habits, my passwords before I started changing them every night. Harlan. Briggs looked up from his notes, eyes narrowing. What? I hadn't realized my fist had clenched around the coin so hard my knuckles went white. Senior Chief has keys to everything down there, I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. He signs off on access for contractors, too. He knows which systems I babysit and when. You think he's D9? Briggs asked. I think he's a door, I said. If D9 doesn't wear his face, they use his authority. He considered that, pen tapping lightly against the paper. Before he could answer, there was a sharp knock at the secure room door. 3 quick raps, too forceful to be casual. Briggs's eyes met mine. We both knew no one was supposed to knock on this door without clearing it first. He stood, moved silently to the wall monitor that showed the tiny camera feed outside. The grainy image flickered onto a small screen. Harlan stood in the hallway. His face was composed, but his shoulders were tight. Behind him, just out of frame, I caught a glimpse of another uniform, officer khakis, no visible name tape. The senior chief looked straight into the camera like he knew I was on the other side. Then he lifted something into view. My old workstation badge, the one that had been misplaced last week. Briggs's hand hovered over the lock control. Don't open it, I said. Because if Harlan was holding my stolen badge outside a secure room he wasn't cleared to enter, this wasn't a conversation. It was a move. Briggs's hand stayed over the lock control, but he didn't press it. The monitor's grainy feed showed Harlan outside, still holding my missing badge between 2 fingers, like a piece of trash he meant to return as a favor. The fluorescent lights in the corridor washed his face flat and pale. His jaw worked like he'd been grinding his teeth. Beside him, just out of frame, that hint of khaki shifted again, an officer waiting in the blind spot. The air in the secure room felt denser. recycled chill brushing the back of my neck. The hum of the remaining terminals filled the silence like low static. "Who has physical access to this deck right now?" Briggs asked quietly. "Watchstanders and authorized admins only," I said. "Harlan's not on that list." He gave a small nod. That matched whatever he already knew. On the screen, Harlan lifted my badge closer to the camera, as if presenting evidence. His lips moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read them. "Lost something, Warren?" Briggs clicked the audio channel on, one way. "And the girl's been sloppy with her access," Harlan was saying to whoever stood beside him. "Badge went missing days ago. Security violation. Figured you'd want to know before we hand her the keys to a fleet." I shouldn't have been surprised. He hadn't just come to rattle me. He'd come to plant a narrative. The officer in khaki leaned just enough into view to reveal silver oak leaves on his collar. Commander. Not from our shop. I didn't recognize his face. "She's in there now?" the commander asked. Harlan nodded. "With Briggs. Admiral's got her spooked about some ghost code. I thought maybe we should talk before this gets out of hand." Briggs muted the feed and exhaled, a long, controlled breath. "They're building a misconduct case," he said. "Convenient timing." My fingers tightened around my father's coin. The metal dug into my palm. "He shouldn't even know I'm in here," I said. "Which means somebody talked," Briggs replied. "Or somebody's monitoring channels they shouldn't." He weighed the next move, eyes flicking between the camera and the dark terminal that D9 had just killed. The tension in the room thickened, like the air before a storm front. He made a decision. "Step back from the door," he said. I did. He pressed the intercom. "Secure room 3. State your business." Harlan snapped to attention like he'd been waiting for the cue. "Senior Chief Al Harlan, comms. Sir, I have concerns about Petty Officer Warren's handling of credentials and systems." "Bring those concerns to me in writing," Briggs said, voice flat. "You're not cleared for this space." The commander stepped closer to the camera. His eyes were cool, assessing. "Commander Lewis, fleet readiness. I've been asked to review any potential breaches related to communications. That includes mishandling of badges." "Noted," Briggs replied. "You can coordinate with my office. This room stays closed." On the monitor, Harlan's mouth twisted. "Sir, with respect, if she's compromised..." Briggs cut the audio again. He looked at me. "If I let them in, they control the story. If I stonewall completely, they escalate above us and say I'm hiding a rogue sailor." "So we're already in their narrative either way," I said. "Yeah," he said, "but I decide which chapter." He hit the intercom once more. "Senior, Commander, this space is under direct tasking from Admiral Ross. Any inquiry goes through him. Until then, Warren stays where she is. That's an order." A charged beat of silence. Then the commander's voice, clipped. "Understood, Commander. We'll brief higher." They stepped out of frame. Harlan didn't move right away. He stayed, gaze locked on the camera, like he was trying to stare directly through the steel and into my eyes. Then he held my badge up one last time, close enough that his thumbprint blurred the lens. He slipped it into his pocket and walked away. The hallway feed went empty. Briggs killed the monitor. The room grew quieter somehow. The air conditioner's steady hiss suddenly seemed very loud. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "He shouldn't have that badge," I said. "If security scans logs, it'll look like I'm walking around 2 places at once." "That's the point," Briggs said. "They're setting up doubt. If the code story doesn't break your credibility, a careless sailor narrative will." He flipped open the paper log again, scribbling notes. He underlined badge 3 times. "Good news is, we're not playing defense alone," he said. I frowned. "Sir?" He jerked his chin toward the door. "You heard me call the Admiral's name earlier. You think I haven't already pinged him with what just happened to that terminal? He's not going to let some readiness commander and a senior chief railroad the one person who brought him actionable intel." The mention of Ross steadied something inside me. I thought of the way his voice had shifted when he'd talked about his daughter, the way he'd looked at the code on the screen, not like it was abstract, but like it had teeth. "What do we do until he gets here?" I asked. "We keep working," Briggs said. "We tighten the evidence trail until even a contractor lawyer can't wiggle around it." He powered up the second terminal. The fan kicked on, a faint vibration through the table. Another secure login prompt. "This one's off the grid," he said. "No mirrored segment, just a sandbox environment. You're going to recreate everything you've seen, start to finish. We'll hash it, timestamp it, and burn it to write once media. If D9 tries to scrub things again, we'll have a clean copy they never touched." The task grounded me. Building, documenting, proving. That was where I knew how to live. "Yes, sir," I said, taking the keyboard. He slid a blank optical disc from a sleeve. The plastic case cracked softly as he opened it. Old school, low tech, very hard to tamper with remotely. As I started reconstructing the fragment, line by line from memory, cross-referenced with the backup logs Briggs had pulled, I felt my shoulders settle. The glow of the screen washed my hands in pale light. The hum of the drive, the rhythmic tap of keys, the faint smell of warmed electronics. This was my world. Behind me, Briggs kept up a steady murmur into a secure handset, feeding updates to someone up the chain. I caught fragments. Non-standard access class. Deliberate obfuscation. Attempted kill switch on isolated hardware. When we finished, Briggs initiated the burn. The drive spun up with a sharp whir, tiny status light blinking. "Once this finalizes, we walk it straight to Ross," he said. "No copies left behind." "If they know you're making this," I said, "they'll try to block it." "They already tried," he replied, glancing at the dead first terminal. "They don't get a second shot." The disc ejected with a soft click. He picked it up by the edges, slid it into a labeled envelope, and sealed it with a strip of tamper tape that crinkled under his thumb. "Go grab your gear from your rack," he said. "You're not sleeping in the same berthing you did yesterday." "Where am I going, sir?" "Temporary quarters near the secure office. Think of it as protective custody without the cuffs." I didn't like the sound of that, but I liked the idea of staying where Harlan expected me to be even less. "Understood," I said. He handed me a slip of paper, a room number, a time, a brief note in tight handwriting. "Debrief with Ross, 1800. Bring everything." My pulse jumped. Today wasn't over. The briefing I'd interrupted was going to have a sequel, and this time, I wouldn't be in the back row. Briggs keyed open the door. The corridor outside looked the same as always. Dull gray bulkheads, fluorescent light, the faint smell of coffee from somewhere down the passageway. But walking out felt different. It felt like stepping from a compartment with known pressure into open sea. We moved fast. No lingering near corners, no stopping to make small talk with passing sailors. Briggs walked half a step ahead of me, presence alone clearing the path. When we reached the ladder well, he paused. "Watch your 6, he said quietly. "Until this is done, assume someone's watching where you step." "I've been assuming that since they left that note," I answered. He nodded once. "Good. Keep assuming it. Just don't let it stop you." He peeled off toward his office. I went down one deck, coin and note pressed together in my pocket, badge clipped where it belonged. The ship's passageways buzzed with normal life. Boots on metal, voices echoing, the distant rumble of machinery. No one looked twice at me. But as I turned into the berthing compartment to grab my gear, I saw it immediately. My rack curtain was open. My mattress edge was flipped, and on my pillow, laid dead center, was a single folded sheet of printer paper. The same cheap stock as before. My stomach went cold. I stepped closer, the air tasting faintly of dust and laundry detergent. Other racks were untouched. This was intentional. I picked up the paper. 4 new words, heavy in thick black ink. Next time, it's not just code. For a second, the words didn't make sense. Next time, it's not just code. They floated on the page in thick black strokes, heavy enough to feel. The berthing lights hummed above me, casting a dull yellow over the rows of racks and half-open lockers. The air smelled like detergent, metal, and the faint, sour trace of someone's unwashed socks. I read the words again. They sank in like a stone. Code had been the warning. Whatever came next wouldn't be invisible. It'd be something that bled, broke, burned. My hand tightened around the note until the paper crumpled and creased against my palm. My father's coin pressed into it from the other side, metal edge biting into paper and skin alike. Someone knew where I slept. Someone wanted me to know they knew. A couple of shipmates chatted near the hatch, laughter bouncing off the metal walls. None of them were looking at me. None of them knew my name well enough to call across the compartment. To them, I was just one more set of boots under one more rack. But somebody had been close enough to touch my pillow. My heart rate climbed, but my breathing stayed slow. Years of practicing calm in cramped spaces hadn't been for nothing. I unfolded the note carefully, smoothing it out with my thumb. The ink was still slightly tacky. Recent. Someone had been here not long before I showed up. I slid it flat into my notebook, behind the first threat note, and walked out with my sea bag slung over one shoulder. The passageway outside felt narrower than usual. Every footstep behind me sounded too loud. I forced myself not to speed up, not to look over my shoulder every 3 seconds. "Watch your 6," Briggs had said. I'd been watching it. I just hadn't realized how close the threat would get. By the time I reached the secure office again, my fingers had imprinted the shape of the coin into my skin. I swiped into the anteroom, waited for the tiny green light over the inner door to flash, then stepped through. Briggs was on the phone, posture tight. The secure handset cord twisted between his fingers as he talked. "No, sir. I'm not comfortable leaving her in standard berthing after what we just saw on the internal feed." Yes, I have the drive." "Understood." He hung up and looked at me. His eyes flicked to the sea bag, then to my face. "What happened?" he asked. I dropped the bag by the wall, pulled out my notebook, and slid the new note across the table. He didn't touch it right away. He just read it. His jaw clenched. "When?" "Just now, on my rack. Curtain open, mattress flipped." He glanced past me at the door, like he could see all the way down the passageway to the berthing compartment. "No one followed you?" he asked. "Not that I saw," I said. "But if they're bold enough to leave this, they're bold enough to walk right past me with a smile." He picked up the note by the corner, holding it away from his uniform. "We'll get this dusted. Maybe we get lucky. But I'm not banking on their fingerprints." He laid it down beside the first note, the 2 threats forming a neat, ugly pair. "Keep quiet or get transferred to nowhere. Next time, it's not just code." "You still think this is just an overthinking E4, Senior Chief?" he muttered under his breath, as if talking to the absent Harlan. He turned back to me. "Change of plan. Admiral wants you in his office early." I glanced at the clock. 15:53. I thought the debrief was at 1800. "Not anymore," he said. "Whatever kill switch D9 used on that terminal spooked him. This," he tapped the new note, "will not help his mood." My stomach twisted. Not from fear of Ross, but from the idea of facing a 4-star with physical threats stacked on top of digital sabotage. It made everything more real. Less like a puzzle, more like a war. Am I going to that debrief as a witness? I asked. Or as a problem? Depends who's talking, Briggs said. From where I'm sitting, you're the only one acting like a firewall instead of a revolving door. He grabbed the sealed envelope with the burned disc, checked the tamper tape, then slid it into a hard case. Let's move, he said. We stepped back into the hallway. The ship sounded normal, boots on deck, distant clang of something being dropped, a sailor laughing too loud at a joke. All of it felt like stage noise now, layered over something darker. Every time we turned a corner, I had to fight the urge to scan for Harlan's face. We didn't see him. We did see Commander Lewis, the readiness officer, standing near a junction with a clipboard. His eyes tracked us as we passed, lingering on the case in Briggs' hand, then on my face just long enough to send a clear message. He was taking inventory. Briggs gave him a brief nod. Nothing more. We climbed a ladder well, metal rungs cold through my gloves. At the top, the atmosphere shifted. Less hum of machinery, more hush of air conditioning. Staff offices, conference rooms. Places where decisions got made while people like me swapped out hard drives below. An armed master-at-arms stood outside Admiral Ross's door. His sidearm was holstered, but his hand rested near it with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how fast he could draw. Commander Briggs, Petty Officer Warren, the MA said. He's expecting you. He knocked once, opened the door, and stepped aside. Ross's office wasn't big. It wasn't grand. Just a desk, a few chairs, a wall of books and binders, and a framed photograph of a young woman in uniform. A tech, judging by the rating badge on her sleeve. She had the Admiral's eyes. The sight of that picture knocked something loose in my chest. Ross stood behind the desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He looked like he'd been fighting a battle with paperwork and losing. At ease, he said before we could snap to attention. Sit. We did. Briggs set the hard case on the desk, opened it, and slid the envelope with the disc forward. Primary copy. All hashes recorded, sir. Ross didn't touch it yet. His gaze was on me. You've had an interesting day, Petty Officer Warren, he said. Yes, sir, I replied. Understatement of the year. Briggs cleared his throat gently and placed the 2 threat notes beside the envelope. She also had these left for her. First one before the briefing, second one on her rack just now. Ross read them. No muscle in his face moved, but the air in the room shifted, tighter, colder. He looked at me. Any idea who left them? Yes, sir, I said, but no proof yet. Say it anyway. Harlan, I answered. No one else knew about my suspicion early enough. And no one else has a reason to shut me up this hard. Briggs added, Senior Chief also showed up outside Secure Room 3 without clearance, holding Warren's previously lost badge. He had Commander Lewis with him, pushing a misconduct narrative. Ross's eyes narrowed. So while we're chasing a saboteur class named D9, my senior enlisted comms lead is playing games with access and smear campaigns. He sat back, fingers steepled. For a moment, I could almost see him on the bridge of a ship in heavy seas, measuring wind and waves against hull and speed. Here's what we're going to do, he said. He opened the envelope, slid the disk into a secure laptop on his desk, and waited. The machine spun up with a soft whir, screen reflecting in his glasses. Code filled the display, the same lines I'd reconstructed with Briggs. He read fast. Not like a tech exactly, but like someone who'd learned enough to understand where the danger lived. When my daughter died, he said suddenly, eyes still on the screen. The first report said systems malfunction. The words dropped into the room like a weight. Later investigations showed someone had patched in untested software from a contractor, bypassing standard checks. Nobody spoke up. Nobody wanted to be the one slowing down deployment. He turned the laptop toward us, finger tapping the D9 signature I'd annotated. "I promised myself," he said quietly, "I wouldn't let another quiet tech get buried under the excuses of people more worried about schedules and careers than lives." My throat tightened. I looked at the photograph on the wall again. The young woman's smile was small but sure, like she thought she had time. "What do you need from me, sir?" I asked. "I need you to keep doing exactly what you did today," he said. "Show your work, stand your ground. Let the rank handle the fallout." He picked up the notes, folded them once, and tucked them into a folder marked Evidence. "As of now, you are under protective supervision," he continued. "No unsupervised contact with Harlan or anyone tied to readiness review. You walk with Briggs or one of my MAs. You eat in secure spaces. You sleep where I say you sleep. Understood?" "Yes, sir." He hit a button on his phone. "Send Harlan to my conference room. Full brass attendance. 10 minutes. My pulse kicked. "Sir, conference room?" He nodded. "We're moving this out of shadows. If someone is sabotaging my fleet from the inside, we're going to bring light and witnesses." His eyes met mine, sharp, unwavering. "You found this in front of a room full of officers, Warren. Now you're going to present it in front of the people who thought you were background noise." He stood. "This is your call. You can stay behind and let me carry it from here. No one will know you chose not to stand in that room." The idea slid through me. A small, tempting door marked Exit. I pictured my mother, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes glued to the news whenever something happened at sea. I pictured my father in black and white photos, grease on his face, coin in his hand. I pictured the note on my rack. Next time, it's not just code. If I stayed in this office while Ross went in alone, D9 would read that as a win. Harlan would read it as proof the threats worked. I closed my hand around the coin in my pocket until it hurt. "No, sir," I said. "I'll be there." A short, satisfied nod. "Good. Conference room 1, 10 minutes. Briggs, you walk her in." We stood. As we stepped out into the corridor, the master-at-arms fell into step behind us. The three of us moved as a unit, purposeful, silent. Sailors flattened against bulkheads to let us pass, eyes tracking but not daring to ask. The closer we got to conference room 1, the more the energy changed. Voices grew fewer, footfalls softer. This was the room where big news was delivered, good and bad. You didn't wander into it by accident. We reached the hatch. Through the small reinforced window, I saw silhouettes already inside, uniforms, shoulders squared, heads bent over folders. Briggs paused with his hand on the handle, looking at me. "This is where it gets loud," he said quietly. "You ready for that background, Emma?" I felt fear. I also felt a strange, clear steadiness, like the calm that hits just before a storm makes landfall. "They stopped calling me that today," I said. He smiled, just a little. "Let's make sure they never start again." He pushed the hatch open. Every head in the room turned toward us as we stepped through. Conference room 1 always smelled like coffee and tension. As Briggs and I stepped through the hatch, a low murmur slid across the room, then died away. The overhead lights were whiter here, harsh on the long table polished to a shine. Folders, laptops, and styrofoam cups lined the surface in neat, controlled clutter. Admiral Ross stood at the head of the table. To his left sat Commander Lewis. To his right, the ship's CO, the strike group staff, and a couple of civilians in suits that didn't belong anywhere near a pier. At the far end of the table, Senior Chief Harlan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression carefully blank. His eyes cut to me the moment I entered, flat and measuring. The Master-at-Arms closed the hatch behind us with a solid thunk. It sounded like a lid being sealed. "Take a seat, Warren," Ross said. Briggs pulled out a chair halfway down the table. I sat, the vinyl cool through my uniform. My father's coin lay in my palm under the table, the worn edges digging into my skin. I could feel my pulse tapping against it. Ross didn't waste time. "Here's what we know," he said, voice even. 3 weeks ago, Petty Officer Warren noticed anomalous code in our emergency comms environment aboard Truman. She attempted to report it up her chain. Today, she exposed it in this network. He nodded to Briggs, who opened a slim laptop and projected the reconstructed code onto the wall. The lines glowed stark against the screen. "If auth order to enrichment Truman strike ground, and status emerge broadcast, then com no null, exec self-erase. Number sig D9. A few of the officers swore under their breath. One of the civilians shifted in his seat, the fabric of his suit whispering. Ross continued. "We have confirmed this branch is deliberate, not random corruption. We have also confirmed an unauthorized attempt to access and then kill power to a mirrored segment in a secure room after Warren and Commander Briggs began a deeper investigation." His gaze traveled the length of the table. No one met it for long. "This is the part," he said quietly, "where I ask who in this room thinks this is just a glitch." Silence. Lewis cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Sir, no one is dismissing the seriousness. But before we jump to sabotage, we should consider contractor updates. Some of these packages come from third-party vendors." Ross cut him off with a small wave. "We'll get to the vendors." His eyes slid to Harlan. "Senior Chief," he said, "I'm more interested in the part where my junior tech says she reported this to you and was told to log it green and move on." Every gaze shifted. Harlan's jaw flexed. He sat up a little straighter. "With respect, Admiral," he said, "she brought me a single printout that didn't match active code. I told her to log what she saw and focus on her assigned tasks. We've been neck-deep in upgrades. I can't divert resources every time someone thinks they see a boogeyman in the logs." His tone was polished, deferential. If I hadn't watched him shut me down, I might have believed it. "Did she bring you more than once?" Ross asked. Harlan hesitated. "Not that I recall, sir." The lie slid across the table like oil. Briggs reached into his folder and placed something on the table. 2 pieces of paper, side by side. "Before we treat this as a misunderstanding," he said, "we should acknowledge the context." Ross picked up the threat notes and read them out loud. "Keep quiet or get transferred to nowhere," he read first. Then the second. "Next time, it's not just code." The room went very still. Commander Lewis frowned. "Where did those come from?" "Her workspace," Briggs said. "And her rack." All eyes drifted toward me, like I'd conjured them myself. Harlan shook his head slowly. "Sir, you can't seriously be linking anonymous scribbles to anonymous," Briggs cut in. "Interesting choice of word." He tapped the notes with one finger. "Because the first one showed up right after Warren pushed the anomaly up the chain. The second appeared on her pillow after she was isolated as a key witness. Convenient timing for a coincidence." Harlan's gaze hardened. "And you're just taking her word on that?" He said her like a lesser category of sailor. Ross studied him. "You've been in long enough to know how this looks, Senior. A junior sailor raises a safety concern. She gets dismissed. Code keeps moving. She escalates in a public brief, and suddenly she's got missing badges and threats on her rack." The Admiral's voice stayed level, but the steel in it thickened. "You got anything you want to tell me about that?" he asked. Harlan's nostrils flared. "Sir, I run a tight shop. If someone's messing with my people, I'll root them out myself. but I won't have my reputation dragged through the mud because an E4 doesn't understand what she's seeing. There it was again. E4. Her. I felt something hot and clean rise in my chest. Not wild anger, not panic, just a line I wouldn't cross backward again. "Permission to speak, sir," I said. Ross nodded once. "Go ahead, petty officer." I met Harlan's eyes. "You're right about one thing, Senior. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. That's why I brought it to you. Because that's what we're taught. See something off, raise it up." I turned slightly toward the Admiral. "But when bringing it up gets you threats and erased logs, that's not guidance. That's suppression." Harlan leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "You accusing me of something, Warren?" His voice held a warning. I didn't flinch. "I'm saying someone wanted this buried," I replied. "And whoever that is understands our systems and our habits well enough to count on one thing: people like me keeping their head down." My father's coin pressed into my palm, grounding me. The memory of his voice feathered the back of my mind. Do the right thing, even if you do it quiet. Ross looked down the table to where the civilians sat. "Let's talk vendors." One of the suits cleared his throat. Tall, thin, with a badge clipped to his lapel that read Baron Tech Systems. His tie was a shade too bold for a military room. "Admiral, I want to be very clear," he began. "Our company complies with all Navy standards. Any code we supply is vetted and documented." "And this?" Briggs asked, pointing at the D9 signature on the projected code. The man shifted. "That isn't ours. At least, not in any package I'm authorized to discuss without legal present." "That's an interesting sentence," Ross said dryly. "Try again." Sweat dotted the vendor's hairline. "Some clients request proprietary backdoors for training environments, easier reset functions. If something like that made its way into a live fleet deployment, it would be a misconfiguration issue, not sabotage." I stared at him. A backdoor that could know comms for a strike group wasn't a reset function. It was a loaded weapon. "Who requested D9 access?" Ross asked. The vendor hesitated. His eyes flickered toward Commander Lewis. Just a flicker, but I saw it. "Answer the question," Ross said. "Fleet Readiness Office," the man muttered. "They wanted ways to stress test comm resilience. It wasn't supposed to be active. Not like this." All eyes turned to Lewis. He lifted his chin. "We authorized simulated failsafes, nothing more. If Baron's people misimplemented..." Briggs cut in. "A simulated failsafe doesn't self-erase and doesn't try to kill an isolated terminal in a secure room." My spine stiffened. "And it doesn't tag access as D9. Lewis's gaze landed on me, cool, annoyed. "You're out of your lane, petty officer." "Her lane is exactly why we're here," Ross said sharply. "Everyone in this room outranks her, but she's the one who caught what your simulations missed." The Admiral turned to me again. "Warren, when you saw that D9 handshake hit the mirror, what did it do before it killed the terminal?" I replayed it in my mind. The new process, the reauth request. "It checked status, sir," I said. "It wanted to know if the failsafe path was still there. When it saw we'd blocked its normal route, it escalated privilege, then cut the connection at the hardware level." "Meaning someone was watching," Briggs added, "in real time." "And wasn't happy we were watching back," I said. Lewis shifted in his chair. "Admiral, this is all circumstantial." Ross slammed his palm lightly on the table, not hard but loud enough to snap the air. "Circumstantial is a code branch that never executes," he said. "Circumstantial is a glitch that doesn't point to anyone. This has authorship.
This has access routing. This has an oversight officer who signed off on vendor tests and a senior chief who sat on reports and now wants to paint my sailor as careless. His gaze raked the room. Anyone still feeling circumstantial? Raise your hand. No one did. He turned to the master-at-arms by the door. Chief, escort Mr. Barron's representative and Commander Lewis to holding. They'll be available to NCIS until I say otherwise. Lewis's face went bloodless. Sir, this is temporary detainment, Commander, Ross said. If you're as clean as you say, you'll have your chance to prove it. The MA stepped forward, hand hovering near his weapon. The vendor swallowed hard and stood. Lewis hesitated, then rose too, jaw tight. As they moved toward the hatch,
Ross looked at Harlan. You're not going anywhere, he said. The senior chief's stiff posture snapped even straighter. Sir, with respect, I've done nothing wrong. We'll see, Ross replied. Until then, you are relieved of all duties. Sit. Harlan sank back into his chair, the metal legs scraping the deck. I felt the air shift, pressure equalizing, like a seal finally broken. Ross looked down the table at me again. You were overlooked, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Until your honesty saved them all. A faint rustle swept through the room. Some officers nodded. One captain actually sat up straighter, like something in the sentence hit home. Heat surged behind my eyes. I blinked it back. Crying in front of brass was off the table. But my grip on the coin loosened just enough to feel the smoothness of its face again, not just the bite of its edges. The Admiral's voice softened a fraction. We're not done. D9 is bigger than one room and one code branch. But we're not losing a fleet because we ignored the one person who was paying attention. He stood. So now we move this from investigative to operational, starting with protection. He nodded to Briggs, then to me. Warren, from this moment on, you're part of the core cyber protection cell for this group. Until further notice, your job is to help us find every shadow D9 left. You'll have access to everything you need. The words landed with a weight I felt in my bones. Access to everything. Me. Sir, I managed. I'm just... You're the sailor who saw what no one else saw, he said. Rank matters, but character matters more. The line hit something deep inside me, the same place that had driven me to stand up in that first briefing, even when my knees wanted to lock. Ross looked around the room one last time. Everyone here will remember this moment, he said. The day an invisible tech stood up and forced us to see what was right in front of us. Somewhere down the table, a chair scraped as someone stood, then another. It wasn't a slow clap. It wasn't cheering. It was something quieter, heavier. One by one, officers rose to their feet. They didn't look at Harlan. They looked at me. They stood. The master-at-arms by the hatch straightened even more, shoulders squared, eyes steady. I hadn't expected any kind of reaction. Not for me. Not like this. The coin in my hand felt warm now, like it had been in sunlight instead of clenched in my fist. For the first time since I'd put on the uniform, I wasn't a background tech in a dark room. I was the one who'd lit it up. After the others filed out, the conference room felt strangely bigger. The chairs still held the faint impressions of the people who'd sat in them. Half-empty coffee cups dotted the table. The projected code on the wall had faded back to the default desktop, a bland blue afterimage of something that had nearly gutted a fleet. Ross closed his laptop and looked at me. Get some water, he said. Then report to secure office for follow-on tasks. It sounded simple. It felt like being handed the next mission after walking out of a firefight. Aye, sir, I said. Outside, the passageway buzzed with speculation. Word travels faster than sound on ships and bases. I could feel the questions in the way people watched us. Curious, cautious, careful not to stare outright. Briggs walked beside me, MA behind us again. "You did well in there," Briggs said quietly as we turned down a side corridor. "Most people choke the first time they have to contradict their senior in front of that much brass." "I wasn't trying to contradict him," I said. "I was trying not to let us die." "That's the only contradiction that matters," he replied. We stopped by a water fountain. The metal mouth felt cold when I pressed the lever. The water tasted of chlorine and copper, the usual base mix, but it felt cleaner than it had any right to. My throat had been dry since the siren in the briefing room. "Now the investigations start for real," Briggs said. "NCIS, IG, maybe Congress later if this gets loud enough." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. "And me?" "You," he said, "have work." We returned to the secure office. The dead terminal still sat dark, an accusing blank rectangle. The other systems hummed steadily, their fans pushing cool, recycled air over our faces. Within an hour, my world shrank to code again. Briggs and I combed through logs from Truman, from shore-based relays, from test environments barren tech had touched. We traced where D9 had called home. We isolated every instance of the signature we could find and mapped its spread across the network like infection patterns. Each new match landed with a soft chime. Each one increased the potential damage we'd narrowly avoided. "Look at this," I said, spinning my terminal slightly. A tree of connections branched across the screen, nodes representing systems D9 had contacted, arrows showing direction and priority. "It's not random," I said. "It's prioritizing command and control nodes, places where a disablement would do the most damage." Briggs nodded, jaw tight. They were building a skeleton key. We ran pattern recognition on the timestamps. A rhythm emerged. D9 check-ins every few days, always during low-traffic windows, like a sniper checking sightlines at dawn. "Whoever this is," I said, "they have patience." "Patience and clearance," Briggs replied. "Bad combination when it's pointed the wrong way." Hours blurred. At some point, a yeoman dropped off boxed food, lukewarm and bland, but I ate without really tasting it. My fingers stayed on the keyboard, my father's coin on the table beside the mouse, a steady weight at the edge of my vision. Late into the evening, an email alert popped up on Briggs's screen. "Court-martial recommendation. Harlan, Al. Charges: dereliction of duty, obstruction, intimidation of witness, mishandling of security credentials." "Fast," I murmured. "Temporary," Briggs said. "Recommendations aren't convictions, but it sends a message." A second alert followed. "Investigation opened. Barren Tech Systems. Focus: unauthorized backdoor implementations, failure to disclose access classes, potential collusion." "So does that," he added. Somewhere, Harlan was sitting in a small room with his rank stripped from his collar, answering questions he'd never expected. Somewhere, Lewis was rehearsing phrases like procedural oversight and miscommunication for a lawyer. D9 remained a set of letters flickering on my screen. "The person behind this doesn't sit in conference rooms," I said. "They use people who do." "That's what scares me," Briggs replied. "But that's also where you come in." He pulled a new file from his bag and slid it across the table. Classified header. Cyber Protection Cell, Initial Manning. My name sat second on the list, below his. "I'm not an officer," I said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. "No kidding. Did today feel like officer-only work?" I glanced at the document again. Tasks, responsibilities, a rough org chart. My job, if this solidified, would be to build out detection patterns, train other techs to spot anomalies, and act as liaison between the people in dark rooms and the people in white hats. "I'm barely qualified," I said, hearing my own doubt. Half the time, I still feel like I'm guessing. Every good investigator feels like that, Briggs said. It's the ones who think they know everything you have to watch. He slid a pen across the table. Sign the bottom. It's just an acknowledgement you've seen it. Paperwork makes the Navy real. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I signed. As I finished the loop of my last name, the secure line on the wall rang, a short, shrill tone that snapped both our heads up. Briggs answered. Briggs? He listened, eyes narrowing slightly. Yes, sir. She's here. Understood. He hung up and turned to me. Pack up the last 4 hours of work, he said. We've got a video debrief with NCIS in 20. On camera? I asked. Everything's on camera now, he said. We consolidated logs, zipped encrypted bundles, prepped diagrams. Briggs handled the call, but most of the questions fell to me. What I saw, when I saw it, who I told, what changed after each step. At one point, the NCIS agent on the other end asked, "Why didn't you stop after the first threat?" I looked into the tiny camera, its green light glowing like an unblinking eye. Because the code didn't stop appearing, I answered. And storms don't stop because someone leaves a note on your pillow. The agent wrote something down, lips twitching like he wanted to smile but wasn't allowed. By the time the call ended, my shoulders ached and my eyes burned. My watch had long since ended. The base outside had shifted into night mode. Even the ambient hum in the building felt softer. Briggs stood, stretching his back until it popped. Go rack out, he said. New room, new lock. I'll send an MA with you. I gathered my things, slipping the coin back into my pocket. As I stepped out into the hallway with the armed escort, I realized I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in the middle of an unfolding sabotage case. Not safety, exactly, but less alone. The new room they assigned me was small, bare, and quiet. The mattress was thin. The air smelled like stale coffee and cleaning fluid. But there was a lock on the inside, and only 3 people knew the room number. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the threat notes from my notebook, and read them one last time. Keep quiet or get transferred to nowhere. Next time, it's not just code. Then I folded them together, slid them into an envelope, and wrote in small, neat letters on the front, Evidence. I placed the envelope on the small desk beside the coin. The room hummed faintly with the building's air system. Somewhere outside, a ship horn sounded, low and mournful, crossing the dark water. I lay back on the bed, boots still on, and stared at the ceiling. I'd made enemies today. Real ones, with resources and clearance and a willingness to threaten beyond code. But I'd also found out what happened when one overlooked tech refused to stay quiet. Tomorrow, the work would continue. D9 would still be out there. And for the first time since I joined the Navy, the fleet wasn't just something I served. It was something I'd helped save. I fell asleep with my hand over the coin, the imprint of its worn face pressing into my palm. The next time I woke up, it wasn't to an alarm. It was to my name over the intercom, ordering me to muster in dress uniform. And one word that made my heart stop for a second. Ceremony. My dress whites never fit right. The fabric was stiff, the creases too sharp, the collar always a fraction tighter than comfortable. But as I checked my reflection in the small mirror, straight seams, smooth cover, ribbons aligned, I felt a strange sense of belonging settle over the awkwardness. The achievement medal they'd pinned on me in a rushed admin ceremony after my first deployment had always looked lonely. Today, the space above it felt heavier, expectant. The master-at-arms met me outside the room and walked me toward the base auditorium. We passed sailors in coveralls, officers in khakis, civilians with badges. Some nodded, some stared. A few whispered. I caught snippets. That's her, right? The tech? Code thing with the strike group. Crazy. E4 calling out an admiral's staff? I kept walking. The auditorium doors loomed ahead, propped open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old upholstery and floor polish. Chairs lined the floor in neat rows, mostly full. The low buzz of voices fell away as I stepped in. Admiral Ross stood on the stage with a small cadre of officers, a podium with the Navy seal, a table with a neat blue folder, and a small velvet box. "Petty Officer Warren," Ross called. His voice carried easily without the microphone. I walked down the aisle. My boots thudded softly against the carpeted steps, each impact measured. I climbed onto the stage, turned, and faced the crowd. Sailors, Marines, civilians. A few faces from the conference room, minus the ones now under heavy investigation. In the second row, I saw a familiar face I hadn't expected to see on base. My mother. Her hands were folded in her lap, knuckles white. She wore the same navy blue sweater she always wore for important occasions. Her eyes were already wet. My chest tightened. Ross stepped to the podium. "Most of the time," he began, "the people who keep us safe don't stand on stages." His gaze swept the room. "They sit in dark rooms, staring at screens full of noise. They listen for knocks in the engine room. They watch for numbers that don't quite line up. They write logs no one reads unless something goes wrong." He gestured toward me with an open hand. "Petty Officer Emma Warren is one of those people." The words moved through me like current. "She noticed what others missed," he continued. "She raised concerns up her chain. When those concerns were ignored, she kept watching. When the threat grew, she made a choice that many would not have had the courage to make." He didn't mention the threat notes. He didn't mention the late-night calls, the dead terminal, the badge in Harlan's hand. Those details would live in reports and investigations. What he said out loud was simpler. In a room full of rank, she stood up and said, "Sir, you need to see this." A soft rumble went through the crowd. She was overlooked, until her honesty saved them all. The line settled over the auditorium like a pledge. He nodded to the yeoman beside him, who opened the velvet box. The metal inside caught the stage lights, a glint of gold and green on the ribbon. Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, with a small gold star already affixed. "Petty Officer Warren," Ross said, stepping closer, "for professional achievement in the superior performance of duties as network technician, for steadfast integrity under pressure, and for actions that prevented potential catastrophic failure of fleet communications. It is my honor to present you with this award." I stepped forward. The medal was cool against my uniform as he pinned it beside my existing ribbon. As he stepped back, he leaned in just enough for me to hear, voice low. "She'd be proud," he said. "My daughter." My throat closed. I managed, "Thank you, sir." We turned to face the audience. "Attention to award," the yeoman called. The room rose as one. "Stand." Boots thudded, chairs scraped, uniforms rustled. It wasn't cheering. It wasn't noisy. It was a wall of presence, every person on their feet in acknowledgement, not just of me, but of what standing up had cost and prevented. For a fleeting second, I saw my father standing in that crowd in my mind's eye, cover tilted back, grease on his hands, coin in his palm. I felt his absence and his presence at the same time. After the ceremony, people filtered out slowly, stopping to shake my hand, clap my shoulder, or just nod. "Good catch, Warren," a lieutenant said. "Saved us a world of hurt." "About time they noticed you, kid," a chief muttered with a half-smile. Briggs found me near the edge of the stage. "You clean up all right," he said. "You too, sir," I replied. He handed me a folder. Orders. The paper was crisp, the print still smelling faintly of toner. "Fleet Cyber Protection Unit," he said. You'll stand up a subcell. Train the quiet ones to speak when it counts. I scanned the document. Permanent change of station. New command, new title. Lead technician? I said. Sir, there are people with more time in service. There are, he agreed. There aren't many who saw this coming and didn't flinch. He tipped his head toward the rows of sailors still lingering. You get to help make sure the next Emma Warren doesn't need an admiral in the room to be heard. The idea settled in my chest like a new kind of weight. Not a burden, a responsibility. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Mom. I stepped aside, away from the noise. Hey, I said, voice softer. For a moment, she just breathed. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the muffled echo of people leaving the auditorium behind her. I watched them pin that thing on you, she said finally. Her voice trembled. I almost passed out. Thanks for coming, I said. I didn't know you were... The Admiral called me, she said. Told me you'd done something important. I leaned against the wall, the metal cool against my chest, the coin warm in my pocket. He told me, she continued, what you risked, what they almost let happen. I braced for the familiar fear, the lecture, the keep your head down, don't make waves speech. Instead, she said 6 words I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. I'm proud of you, Emma. My eyes stung. I swallowed hard. Even with the danger? I asked. Especially with the danger, she said. You didn't go looking for it. You stopped it from looking for someone else. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer right away. I just listened to her breathe. Your father would argue with how you did it, she added, a soft smile in her tone. But he'd be proud too. I laughed once, shaky. He'd tell me to keep my head down. He'd tell you to keep your ship afloat, she corrected. And you did. We talked a little longer, about new orders, about travel, about how she hated flying but would do it to visit if the unit ended up across the country. When the call ended, my chest hurt in a good way. Later, after the crowd thinned and the uniforms blurred into the background again, I found myself alone on the pier. The sun was edging toward the horizon, painting the water in bands of gold and steel blue. The carrier loomed in the distance, massive and patient, waiting for its next deployment. The air smelled of salt and fuel, and the faint, familiar tang of rust. I stood there, fingers moving automatically, coin in one hand, metal in the other. Old metal, new metal, legacy and recognition. Behind them, in my pocket, the threat notes were flattened and stamped with chain of custody seals, on their way into case files and evidence boxes. I closed my fist around both coin and metal, feeling the contrast, the smooth wear of one, the sharp edges of the other. The wind tugged at my uniform, cool against my face. I looked out at the ocean. Dad, I whispered, the word whipped thin by the breeze. I did the right thing. The waves answered with a low, steady roar against the hulls. I didn't know where D9 was. I didn't know how many more codes we'd have to unravel, how many more quiet techs I'd have to convince to speak up before we stopped thinking of ourselves as background. But I knew this. I had been invisible. I had stepped into the light. And I wasn't planning on going back into the shadows anytime soon. I slipped the coin back into my pocket and pinned the metal firmly to my chest. Rank could move up or down. Evaluations could be rewritten. Commands could change. What didn't change was the choice I'd made in that briefing room. To stand up. To speak. To protect people who didn't even know they needed protecting. I turned away from the water and headed back toward the lights of the base, toward the secure office where logs waited and patterns hid. Rank can be given. Character is proven. If you've ever felt alone, left behind, or hidden by the past, subscribe for true stories about family, truth, and finding your way home.